Remils the Third was, to put it mildly, a problem. He was 15 years old, roughly the size of a small bear, and possessed all the charm of a particularly grumpy badger. His skin was pasty, perpetually glistening with a faint sheen of grease, and his double chin often swallowed his already small mouth whole when he was annoyed, which was most of the time. He wasn't just large, he was gargantuan. The castle servants had long since given up trying to tailor his clothes, and instead resorted to draping him in vast swaths of green silk, which only amplified his imposing, yet somehow still unimpressive, figure. He moved with a ponderous waddle, leaving a trail of discarded pastry crumbs and exasperated sighs in his wake. But Remils wasn't just fat, he was spectacularly rude. He snapped at chambermaids, bellowed orders at the cooks, and treated the royal tutors with utter disdain. "Faster!" he'd bark at the harpist, his jowls quivering with impatience, "or I'll feed you to the royal hounds." He once threw a whole flagon of ale at a particularly slow-moving page and regularly demanded to be fanned even when the temperature was perfectly reasonable. And yet, this was the boy set to inherit the throne of Eckridge. Not because he was loved, not because he was wise, but because he was the only surviving heir after a particularly nasty bout of the plague. The coronation was only days away. The kingdom was abuzz with nervous energy. The common folk huddled in taverns, murmuring about their soon-to-be ruler with a mixture of trepidation and disgust. The nobility, ever concerned with appearances, put on brave faces while secretly dreading the reign of the gluttonous bully. In his chambers, Remils was oblivious to the anxiety he inspired. He lay on a mountain of cushions, a half-eaten treacle tart balanced precariously on his stomach, bellowing for more gooseberry jam. His tutor, a gaunt man named Galwin, attempted to engage him in conversation about the responsibilities of kingship. "Your Majesty," he began, his voice trembling slightly, "it is important that you understand the needs of your people." "Shut it, Galwin," Remils grumbled, his mouth full. "My only need is another tart, and maybe some sausages." He licked his fingers, the sticky residue leaving a faint scent of sugar and impatience. Galwin sighed and pinched the bridge of his nose. He'd been teaching Remils for 5 years and had yet to see a single flicker of empathy or genuine interest in anything beyond immediate gratification. The day of the coronation dawned gray and overcast. As Remils was being dressed, or rather draped in the royal robes, he couldn't help but sneer at the anxious faces around him. He was finally going to be king, and he was going to have everything he wanted. The ceremony was a blur of hushed whispers and forced smiles. Remils lumbered his way to the throne, the weight of the crown feeling oddly light on his enormous head. He settled himself heavily, the plush velvet cushions groaning under his weight. The archbishop began to intone the age-old oath, his voice echoing through the cathedral's vast space. Remils, however, was not listening. He was too busy eyeing a particularly large platter of roasted fowl, which had been placed in the corner of the room. He nudged the Lord Chamberlain, who stood beside him with his elbow. "When's the feasting?" he demanded, his voice loud enough to create an awkward silence in the cathedral. The Lord Chamberlain, a frail man with eyes that held the weariness of 1,000 sleepless nights, stammered, "Your Majesty, the feasting will commence following the formal address." Remils rolled his eyes. Formal schmoral. Get the food. He then proceeded to do something truly unexpected.